when you were saying that, reparations should be for the repair of a nation, I want to throw just a few twists on that, and let's say reparations should be for the funding and repair of a nation state, and maybe the sovereignty of a particular people. Okay, so I threw out nation state, and sovereignty. All right, I want to just mention a couple of
Wait,
things.
was that a question? Oh,
No,
you.
no, no.
Oh, oh.
I just wanted to point out that I was just throwing a little extra slant
Hmm.
onto the idea that reparations is to repair a nation. And then I said repair and fund a nation state and sovereignty for the affected people. Let's just say, as an
Okay.
example, you may have a pushback on that, but let me throw that out.
No, actually, I feel it's the same thing, but go on.
Okay, so recently I want to mention two things.
Hmm.
Recently, there's a book that's come out by a New York columnist, a black man named Charles Blow. It's a book called The Devil You Know. And in this book, he advocates that black people across the United States should move en masse to the southern part of the country to harness strong political and economic power, as well as greater community building. Okay, so I want to throw that out.
Hmm.
Not necessarily a nation state, but the idea that we're together, there could be some semblance of a geospace where a particular nation of people, if they thought themselves as such, would reside. And I also want to say that about 25 years ago, there was a person by the name of Jeffrey Anderson, a white man. He was the director of a group called Americans for Self-Determination. And he said that contemporary white people would never accept the term reparations as a debt that was legitimately owed by them to black people. He then went on to say, however, he said that if one looked at it as a financial investment, he said it would be heard by whites, or could be heard by whites, as an arrangement, and perhaps heard by black people as reparations, but that the only way that white people would hear such an idea, whether it be heard by black people as reparations or heard by them as a financial arrangement, would be if it were linked to a separatist plan. And this group, Americans for Self-Determination, known as ASD, which was kind of a white nationalist-oriented group, advocated the ethno-cultural partition of the U.S. into quasi-autonomous regions through peaceful means to heal racial strife. So between what Charles Blow is saying in his book, The Devil You Know, and what I mentioned to you about the white gentleman, Jeffrey Anderson, saying that, some type of partition would be linked to a separatist plan. And by the way, what his organization advocated was that if whites and blacks supposedly negotiated about, remigrations to settlement areas, let's say black people were most in the South, that black people would have to give up any notion of affirmative action in the areas that were the predominantly white territories. So in other words, this would be a semi-autonomous setup. Maybe blacks are mostly in the South and they run things the way they want, and whites are in other spaces, Utah, or Colorado, or whatnot, and therefore there will be no affirmative action out there. What's your just reaction to all of it if we're approaching the notion of community, some sense of nationhood, even if it's not a full out country?
My reaction to that is that we love white people so much. The thought of not having them around us is what makes us come up with, really, in my opinion, dumb concepts like that. It's like you're in a
Some
house.
concepts that Mr. Anderson said about geo-partitioning the U.S.
Yeah, like, listen, you're in an abusive situation with an abusive as a spouse. Their solution is the equivalent of saying, all right, instead of sleeping in the same bedroom with your spouse, let's get another room in the house as your safe space.
Mm-hmm.
Why are we so afraid of having control over our own destiny, having our own manifest destiny, so to speak, having a situation where we control the socioeconomic and political context and there's no white people there? When I went to Rwanda, that was some of the most peaceful moments that I've had on this planet. And the reason why, there was nothing but black people. The whole time I was there, I can count on one hand the amount of, half of a hand, the amount of white people that I saw.
Do you
Could
think
you
that
imagine?
more peace?
You imagine how beautiful that is, where you actually in a place that your people are controlling. Everywhere you go, you see black faces in positions of power, black faces, and you don't feel under pressure. You don't feel like you being discriminated against or somebody looking at you different because everybody's black.
Do you think that advocacy for nationhood then actually would be more of a pathway toward peace and tranquility? That in fact, black people advocating for integration more with a people who do not accept that is actually creating more tension?
Of course.
And
Bottom line.
you see, that right there is something that I don't think that people have really been discussing. Like, for example, I don't hear anyone talking about how, for example, if black people got reparations, even if it's not enough or something, whatever. But the goal was not sovereignty, not nationhood, not separateness, separate development. That it was for integration. I don't hear anybody talking about what would be the blowback, in an integrated space in which these black people would be perceived to have gotten reparations, that they might be in a more hostile situation than we are in now.
Might.
Well, for sure. Well, for sure we would be. But what I'm saying is they're not discussing that as a premise. And what I'm concerned about is why isn't that talked about? I mean, do they think they're just going to get reparations? Well, first of all, many think they're just going to get reparations from the U.S. government without the buy-in from masses of white citizens. That's the first fallacy. So, but anyway, they don't somehow deal with the fact that they're going to be in a more hostile situation than before. And I just wonder why that psychology is the quest for reparations just in terms of all the parameters of it just delusional or what?
Well, if the person has come up with an ass backward premise, is it any shock that they can't think it through?
Right.
Where the very premise is flawed, they're not thinking to begin with. They're reacting and being emotional and reactionary. So I don't expect them to think things through. Like I've always asked this question: let's say that you have this fantasy where Black people are just in the South, the roads and the highways are still controlled by white people. The ports, the seaports and the airports are still controlled by white people. What country are you going to do trade in with your nation outside of America?
Well, that's actually going to be one of my next questions, but I think that whatever is done here on a temporary basis, I mean, from my own perspective, and I know I'm interviewing you, but from my own perspective, I think there are multiple parts of various things. And that is that we definitely need an Africa plan. But the reality is, if you got 50 million people, we need to be engaged with Africa on varying levels, whether it be repatriation, dual citizenship, other sorts of things as well. But to me, it won't hurt as a temporary measure, or at least a more proactive measure about movement to the South, at least on that level. That's not a panacea, and it's not a full solution, but I think it's better than being completely spread out. But what you said was that you're still in the same country, so you're still not going to have the kind of sovereignty, even if you have partitioned spaces theoretically. Okay. But
can I say something?
Yeah.
I just want to address what you're saying, and I want to put it in a way that I think you and everybody else will understand. When you play chess, what's the objective of the game?
To win.
Checkmate, right?
Checkmate. Mm-hmm.
You got to get his king. In order to do that, there's certain things that you have to do. Like they say that chess has 3 stages. It's the opening, and then you have the mid game, and then you have the end game. When I look at all of these little maneuvers that people want to do, and like all the stuff that you mentioned that these people are for, that's not somebody that's trying to win the game. That's somebody that's just playing defensively and just making moves on the chessboard. No, you have to have a goal and a plan. And you got to have a vision. And your vision and your goal and your plan should be to beat the person that you're playing so that you in the game on top and they lose. Now ask yourself, all of these people with all of these different philosophies and all these different strategies and tactics, does it sound like weak moves, or does it sound like they're really trying to take this person's head off with this move?